The topic that brings us here today is intellectual property. It is an interesting topic because it divides. It is a topic that greatly divides libertarians. Just like anarchism versus minarchism is one of the great intellectual divisions, the debate of intellectual property is one of the central debates in the current liberal libertarian movement. On the one hand, the harder sectors, more orthodox, let's say, of the Austrian school, combined with the libertarian left, there is an alliance here. On the other hand, the more centrist sectors, for example, the Chicago School, with the law and economics of Posner and their successors, or all the objectivists, starting with the works of Ayn Rand, they are defenders of intellectual property. When we talk about intellectual property, we talk about five things basically, if I remember correctly. 1. Patents. The idea that a good or a service can only be produced by a person who is, supposedly, the first to conceive or design it and has a patent, a monopoly, on production. 2. Copyright. That is, if I write a book, make a song or a poem, no one can copy it from me. Only I have the right to enjoy the income that derives from that good. 3. The trade secret. The idea that I know how to do something but I don't tell anyone. 4. The idea of the trademark, the registered trademark, the idea that I make a design, a drawing, something like that. I wear a lizard here on a sweater, or I design a horse and I patent a registered trademark. And 5. The property of one's own image. It is a debate that exists. Can I put Oscar's photo in a meme defending, for example, the Ministry of Industry? I mean, do I have a right to my own image or not? Well, I understand, and this is the controversy we can have here, that of the 5 ways, 4, in my opinion, are illegitimate, and only 1 is legitimate. For me, only trade secrets are legitimate. The other 4 ways include some kind of force, some kind of state intervention to defend it. Furthermore, they violate real physical property. We will talk about this. The history of intellectual property is not born in the mists of time. It has a dated origin. The first patent laws, as far as I know, are from Venice in the 15th century. Copyright laws are from the Statute of Anne, at least in the Anglo-Saxon world. They didn't exist before. And patents, for example, had a very hard intellectual fight, after which, in the 19th century, were close to being abolished, all of them. It is told by a disciple of Mises, a renegade disciple of Mises, Fritz Machlup. One day, Mises had heard him at a conference defend flexible exchange rates. He smashed his face and never spoke to him again. And he did well. And he did well. But he was his disciple. When he was a beloved disciple, he wrote a book about the patents in the 19th century, where he explains these topics. So, these are the kind of interventions that exist. Patents are basically created to privilege certain producers, usually friends or cronies, or as they say, cuates, as they say in Latin America, of the bosses of the powerful. If I had the power, because I have the weapons and had a territory, I can make any of them rich. I can make any of you rich. If I have weapons, I have the power, I make anyone rich. I give Alfredo the monopoly of salt, Dario the monopoly of tobacco. I give you a water concession, for example, right? And I give them electricity, and to both of them the telephones, and I make them all rich. I give them a patent, I forbid others with physical force to intervene. They give me a part for myself. And they are happy and I'm happy. It's bad for the rest of the population, who have to pay for more expensive goods and services. But basically that's the idea. It's a patent. It's an old idea to plunder people. It was later theoretically justified. Like everything, if any idea occurs to you, then you have to justify it based on an ethical argument, based on a moral argument, based on some utilitarian arguments, on some high-level arguments. And copyright too. Its origins are very simple. It appears with the printing press. And why does it appear with the printing press? Because it is a censorship mechanism, so that certain books cannot be published. Copyright is established as a government permission to publish a book. So it is used to control the books that printing companies publish. Before the existence of printing companies, there was no copyright. So these kinds of ideas, trademarks and things like that, are usually statist ideas. Except the trade secrets. Trade secrets are compatible with freedom. If I know something, I don't have to tell it to others. As you see, curiously, the real rights, those related to trade secrets, are systematically violated. For example, Microsoft is forced to publish its source code when it's their secret. On the other hand, Microsoft's practices in other areas, however, are respected. It is the opposite of how it should be. The only thing that is compatible with freedom, which is the trade secret, that is an unfair monopoly, a predatory monopoly. So you have to publish it so people know. However, not the other things. What two types of arguments are given to justify patents? First, utilitarian arguments, philosophical in nature. These are basically the arguments given by Chicago, Posner, for example, and all his successors. It's called Posnerian Law and Economics, which is a supplement. They talk about those principles. All Ronald Coase models go along that line, utilitarian models. Coase, in his work The Problem of Social Cost, talks about an allocation problem of properties according to the utility that each one provides. So, what is the idea? The idea is that, using an interpretation of the American Constitution, where there is an article, it says, "The Republic will promote the progress of the arts and sciences." With that little word, they justify all intellectual property, because, supposedly, without intellectual property, there would be no progress in either the arts or the sciences. It is an intellectual dispute. Also, Douglas North, the prize for economics in 1993, The Birth of the Western Civilization, says that the great progress of humanity is due to the creation of patents, and he identifies patents with technical progress, and that the state must promote progress. The first question is very well posed by the environmentalists, and I agree with them. Why does there have to be progress? I mean, why does the government have to make anything progress? Some have the right to progress, others want degrowth, others want to stay as they are. Why does the state have to promote, using force, progress in something? For example, if I have an industry, normal and ordinary, why do I have to finance with my taxes the competition that is going to eliminate me? I can't eliminate the competition. I have no right to eliminate the competition, but there is no right to force me either to finance my own competition. That right does not exist. I think it is radically unfair. And above all, why do we have to finance progress? Progress is an ideology. If you study it, it is an ideology. It is in the minds of all of us as a good thing. For example, if you read the wonderful books of Bury, or the wonderful books of Robert Nisbet, Social Change and History, or History of the Idea of Progress, trace the idea of progress and how it is considered as a justification to make certain public policies. But it is an ideology, which has Christian roots. As time goes by, things progress and so on. It is an ideology. It is right or wrong, but it is an ideology. And if I don't have that ideology, and I am a degrowther, or I want to stay as I am, why do they have to force me to finance something? So that's the first argument. Second, the patents, the copyright, encourages progress or not? I do not think so. In fact, most of the inventions were made in the absence of patents. Michele Baldwin mentions this in his book, Against Intellectual Monopoly. Of the 10 great medicines in history, 8 were made without a patent, and the other 2 50-50. 8 of the 10 great medicines, including aspirin, were made without a patent, and people investigated. So, it's not because of that. Baldwin also says something else. He says that the Industrial Revolution was delayed because of patents, because of what steam engine patent, which delayed things. Why did this patent delay things? Basically because patents prevent the improvement of what already exists. Human beings historically improved already existing things. Take the example of a car, a modern car. Compare it with a Ford T or a car from the 20s. In essence, they are the same. 4 wheels, a chassis, some seats, a steering wheel and a motor. A modern car is basically the same. 4 wheels, a steering wheel, an engine and so on. Each of those pieces improved. The steering wheel over time is much better. The engine is much better. The fuel is much better. The wheels are much better. Everything is better. And why? Because already existing things were improved. Copying and improving what already exists. That's usually the procedure of human invention. Medicines are also being improved, step by step, striving to improve aspects of aspirin, which is an off-patent medicine. There are lemon aspirins, there are powder aspirins, there are liquid aspirins. There are 1,000 different aspirins, many ways to produce it. And all opiates are something similar. Since morphine, which is synthesized at the beginning of the 19th century, a lot of things were created. That's the idea. In the time of Henry Ford, they did not want to patent a car, they wanted to patent the car, the concept of automobile. If it was like that, there would be no improvement. We would have to design around to improve the car. Instead of financing the car, they would have, for example, to design caterpillars, like excavators or tanks, something that would work differently. Or imagine cars that drove like modern trains, by magnets. We'd have to redesign a whole new thing, instead of improving what exists, which is cheap and effective. The same thing happens when we design a pharmaceutical molecule. You have to circle all the patents that were registered. When they register a patent, the cycle is patented. You patent the process. You patent something and also the way that thing is made, and all the possible ideas to make that thing. That removes the incentive to improve. How do human beings improve things? Always improving already existing things. The proof? Let's compare with intellectual inventions that are not patented. Fashion is not patented. Does fashion evolve? Yes or no? The food industry. Are the cooking recipes patented or not? They are not patented and they constantly improve. I see these guys from MasterChef. Things like that. Jokes are not patented. When someone does something, don't hundreds of jokes and memes quickly appear, without copyright? Magician's tricks, for example. There was even a theorist who even wanted to ban VHS, because VHS revealed the magician's tricks. When they recorded them, they project it in slow motion, and they catch the tricks of the magicians. Then some magicians complained, and wanted to ban VHS, because it ruined magicians' tricks. Thank God magicians are not patented. There are still new tricks, there are still new things. But not only that, all marketing procedures, all management procedures are not patented. All basic science is not patented. So, those are the first principles. Patents don't work. There is no proof that they manage to develop a country and economy. I think they delay it. Second, moral aspects. The idea is that a person has the right to his own work and has the right to the product of his work. He worked, he made a great effort, and deserves to be rewarded. First, what we have to say to someone who invents or writes something new is that nothing is taken away from him. The good thing about intellectual property is that you can have it and I can have it. Nothing is taken away from me. The only thing that happens is that the value of my property may go down. But remember one thing, I only have the right to property, not the right to the value of the property, which is very different. I have the right to have a car, but I have no right for the car to continue to be as valuable as before. I have the right to my property, not the right to the value of the property, because it can change, and it depends on other people's valuations, and I have no right to govern other people's heads. Another argument. Intellectual property rights threaten my body and threaten my properties. First, it prevents me from using my head, my vocal cords, or my hands. I have something in my brain, but I can't use it. Someone prevents me from being able to recite a poem, or sing a song, hear, or use something. They are repressing the use of my body. There are things my own body can't do. My brain can't work on certain topics simply because they are patented. Second, it even affects entire industries, and it affects my property. If I have a photocopier, paper and ink, I can't use them the way I want. Third, they are violations of my property. It is a violation of physical property that is scarce, to defend something that is not scarce. Also, I don't know where my effort begins and where it ends. When I write a play, when I write a book, when I write something, how much do I have to pay the person who invented the alphabet? How much do I have to pay to whoever invented the Spanish language? How much do I have to pay to whoever invented paper? If I devise a physical theory, it's not patented, but a practical application is patented. If I say something orally, is it different to putting it in written form? If I put it in writing, it has a copyright. If I say it orally, you can retweet me and do 1,000 things with it. If I say, capitalism is good and socialism is bad, I say it and then I tell a joke or I say a phrase. I say something in class or something like that, and you can repeat this idea. I wish you repeat it many times. But you can repeat it whenever you want. But if I write it, you can't. If I put it like this, the same thing, capitalism, and so on, now you can't. Well, no. It's the same. Next, where do things begin and where do they end? For example, Shakespeare made variations of classic works, of classic stories that already existed. He improved them a lot. Many stories derive from the myth of Faust. Marlowe's Faust, Goethe's Faust, The Master and the Margarita of Bulgakov. The story is the same, all of them. A man who sells his soul to the devil in exchange for things. The story is the same in all cases. It's the same book. Where does it begin and where does the intellectual property end? Where does my effort begin and end? Do I have the right to the value of my efforts? I do not have the right to the value of my efforts. Gloria Alvarez spoke before about meritocracy, and unfortunately, I don't have the right to the value of my efforts, because that depends on other people's valuation. I can try very hard, give a fantastic class here, give myself a hard time, and the others, you're worthless. I just don't have the right to that.
Yo voy a hablar sobre todo sobre las cuestiones éticas de la propiedad intelectual.
I'm going to talk about ethical issues of intellectual property, and since I am against intellectual property, what I'm going to do is basically steal Bastos' ideas. Intellectual property is an important issue, although it is not exactly one of the essential themes, but it is a very important topic because it deals with the concept of property, and having to debate whether intellectual property or is not property means you are forced to elaborate, form arguments, and think about the specific characteristics of the property. And property is one of the essential principles of liberalism and capitalism. Therefore, when thinking about intellectual property, there is also a lot of progress in the philosophical principles of libertarianism or capitalism. Within the libertarian authors and classical liberals, there are different debates, there are different ideas. Not everyone says the same things. For example, in favour of intellectual property is Lysander Spooner, Ayn Rand, and Andrew Glambos. However, against intellectual property, there are other authors like Wendy McElroy, Stephen Kinsella, Roderick T. Long, and Sheldon Rickman. And the truth is that on both sides there are pretty good ideas. So, for the principles of the philosophy of libertarianism, it is important to find out who is right. I'm going to try to explain why those who are against the principles of intellectual property convince me more. I'm not going to make too many distinctions. In Spain, for example, a distinction is made between intellectual property, copyright, which is for artistic or scientific creations, and industrial property, which are the patents. And I'm going to more or less speak in general terms. The idea of intellectual property seems suspicious to me for purely intuitive reasons, not for theoretical reasons. Usually, intellectuals and artists are constantly criticizing capitalism, and then they defend intellectual property. And you don't defend private property? It seems suspicious to me. I don't know. Maybe there's something weird here. Another intuitive thing is this. Now there is a television channel where they show mixed martial arts fights. One day I was watching one of these channels, and suddenly they put on an ad, and the ad was about football. And then they started saying, when there is piracy, transfers disappear, football disappears. And I said, is football disappearing? Is football really about to disappear? It's just like when you go to the cinema and they put an advertisement before the movie. It says, with piracy, culture disappears. And suddenly a poor poet vanishes and disappears like tears in the rain. So they are telling you, piracy destroys culture. Piracy destroys artistic creations. And intuitively, I think, I've never seen an ad like that trying to explain to people that stealing material property is wrong. I never went to the cinema and saw, stealing an old woman's purse is wrong, don't do it. I think most people already know this. What I mean is that it seems that people intuitively understand or tend to think that there is a difference between intellectual property and ownership of material things. Because if there was not that intuitive vision, people wouldn't need awareness campaigns. That's one of the things that seems intuitive to me. Another thing is, they also usually say, if there was no intellectual property, we would live in some kind of cultural parade. Culture would end. Homer in the Iliad begins, sing to me, O Muse, of that man skilled in all ways contending, who wandered far before he helped sack the great city of Troy. And I read it and I'm like, he is not bad at writing. There was no intellectual property. So I started studying the arguments libertarian authors use. There tend to be two arguments, some utilitarian, and others that are ethical to justify intellectual property. If you are trying to know if the rights of intellectual property are fair or not fair, utilitarian arguments are worthless, because the function of the law is justice, not economic growth. So it is not that economic growth is not important, but you can't substantiate the justice of property rights on utilitarian arguments. So I'm going to talk broadly about ethical arguments. As Professor Bastos pointed out, the main justification of intellectual property is that it is fair for an author to receive benefit for an original idea that he created. And some authors, like Ayn Rand for example, try to derive from the same principle that Locke applies to material property, which is, if I possess myself and I apply my body and use work on something that no one had before, then that new thing becomes a part of my property. When Ayn Rand tries to justify that in artistic or intellectual creations, something similar happens, that if I invent a new idea, a poem or whatever, I am also using my body and creating ideas, and then that becomes my property, and I have to benefit from that. The main criticisms, there are three, are, first of all, ideas are not scarce, as stated before. Property rights make sense when there is a possibility of conflict, and conflicts can only occur when resources are scarce. That is, if I have this pen and he wants to grab my pen, we can't both have it at the same time. If I have an idea and I tell it to Ismail, we both have the idea at the same time. If Ismail tells it to Bastos, the three of us have it. He tells it to someone else, and so on. That is, the ideas can be infinitely multiplied. Therefore, applying the concept of property to something not subject to scarcity makes no sense. Ethical conflicts could arise. In fact, what intellectual property does is to artificially create scarcity where there was none before. To solve these problems regarding ideas, there is usually a tendency in legislative codes to say that intellectual property does not protect ideas, only the expression of ideas. You are the owner or the expression of the idea. But this also has problems, because there is actually no difference between ideas and the expression of ideas. The expression of ideas are also ideas. And even if they were not, that is, although there was a difference between ideas and the expression of ideas, there would also still be problems. Because let's imagine, for example, I write a certain combination of words, and then, according to the law, I am the owner because that is the expression of a certain idea. The problem is that, with the exact same combination of words, I can refer to multiple ideas. Anyone who has received a WhatsApp message from his girlfriend would know. Because I said, I'm going out with friends. And she said, have a good time. She says, have a good time. Great. Well, it wasn't like that. Another time, she sent me a message again. Have a good time. And that time she actually meant, have a good time. That is, with the same combination of words, the idea she refers to can be completely different. Borges wrote a story called Pierre Menard, author of Don Quixote, in which a guy from the 19th century wants to write Don Quixote word by word. The first idea he has is to travel back in time and become Don Quixote. But he says that's very easy, so he's going to write it as Pierre Menard, and he quotes two paragraphs from Cervantes' work, and also from the work of Pierre Menard. Word for word they are the same, but Borges makes a completely and radically different interpretation of Don Quixote by Cervantes and Don Quixote by Pierre Menard. And that same thing, for example, is done by Quentin Tarantino. He has a theory of interpretation in films. For example, the one that Ismail likes so much. In Pulp Fiction, one of the characters really likes a Bible paragraph, and he makes, at one point in the film, 3 different possible interpretations. Furthermore, Tarantino says that he likes to watch any movie, whatever it is, as if it was a gay love story. So he says he likes to watch Top Gun like this, like a gay love story. So you can interpret with the same set of words different ideas. Even if intellectual property gave someone ownership of a certain idea, I could copy the same words and say, no, I'm talking about a different idea. Then there are other problems. Bastos already pointed out that intellectual property threatens material property. It doesn't let me make, with the things that I have, what I want, even if I don't attack anyone. And then another problem is arbitrariness. Definitions of intellectual property, they are completely arbitrary. For example, they tell you, patents last 20 years, intellectual property lasts 70 years after the death of its author, 95 in the United States if it's corporate property, It's like if they tell you, if you buy this pen, you have it until midnight, until the clock strikes.
Pero eso no es arbitrario, eso se dice porque igual.
That is not arbitrary. When it was done, Walt Disney had been dead for 70
Y
years,
es arbitrario.
and that is arbitrary. It was decided using arbitrarian arguments. That is the very definition of arbitrariness. Okay, so that's why it's very bad, and thank you very much for your attention.
Yo voy a hablar sobre todo de las patentes, más que de-
I am going to specifically talk about patents, instead of copyright or other intellectual property stuff. And the main utilitarian argument to defend patents is that, thanks to the patent system, innovation is encouraged. It is said that innovation has social benefits, that the improvements that are made thanks to innovation benefit everyone, but the private benefits may not be great. So maybe a businessman spends resources in developing a technology, but afterwards, when he puts it into operation, if that technology is not protected by patents, a bad businessman can come, imitate him, develop that technology, carry out the same production process, and eliminate the profits of that businessman. So it is said that there is no incentive for innovation. Basically, the main utilitarian argument is that the social benefits are superior to private profit. Therefore, they say it is necessary to impose a patent system. Well, I'm going to talk about the economic arguments against that justification, and the first one is, especially from the point of view of the methodology of the Austrian school, that the concept of social benefits, which is based on the objectivist methodology, is incorrect, because that implies the idea that interpersonal utility comparisons can be done, and that can't be done, because benefit or utility is a psychic phenomenon. You can't measure it, so you can't aggregate it. Furthermore, valuations change depending on the person, and they also change at different moments in time. Then, the problem they say about imitation. Imitation happens in all economic activities, and it's good. It is what leads to the dynamic adjustment of the economy. Through imitation, other businessmen, who imitate a successful businessman, transfer resources to carry out those same activities, and that causes an increase in demand of the factors of production, which causes an increase in its price. At the same time, the increase in supply causes a reduction in the price of the product. In this process, the benefit disappears, but the price of the product was reduced, and resources moved to those activities that best satisfied the needs of the consumers. In other words, that imitation process is fundamental for the improvement of human beings, for economic growth. Then, regarding the justification of patents, they say there is a market failure in which there is not enough research. How can someone know what's enough research? Whether there is a lot of research, little research, too much research? In the free market, you are able to know, because that depends on the business function. It is the businessmen who are the ones that determine how to allocate resources. They are the ones who determine if there needs to be much or little research, and they do that to satisfy the needs of consumers. And if they do that well, it can be proven they make profits. If they make profits, it means they used the resources well. If not, they did not use the resources well. Every state intervention distorts the free market system that allows businessmen to have the required information to allocate resources to the appropriate activity. Actually, the patent system is a kind of protectionism. It creates an artificial monopoly that generates a scarcity that did not exist before. Like every state intervention, a zero-sum game is created, in which some individuals can benefit by harming other individuals. The main argument to defend the patent system is that it promotes innovation, but there are a set of arguments that indicate they do not promote innovation. For example, intellectual products, innovation, development, and technology are not created from nothing. They are social products. They depend, among other things, on the education of individuals, from their childhood education, the environment in which they grew up, the training they received, the ideas that influence them, and the fact is that the more information there is, the more valuable the information becomes, and the open process of collaboration and cooperation, tacitly or directly, makes it easier to have more information. Patents impose a cost on creation and transmission of information. Therefore, they do not promote innovation. This is related to another issue that, as Professor Bastos said, most technological innovation is a cumulative process. That is, there are no technological revolutions that appear out of nowhere, or where a completely new technology is developed. Most innovations are built based on existing technologies. Stephen Hawking calls it the effect of the giant's shoulders, referring to Newton's famous expression about his scientific discoveries. Newton said he saw further than others because he had stood on the shoulders of giants. The patent system makes it difficult to get on the shoulders of giants. It imposes a cost on the aggregation of information. What patents actually do is to eliminate competitive pressure. This is what Rothbard said. When a businessman has a patent, he can rest on his laurels. He no longer has to innovate anything. He already has guaranteed income. Another author called Machen mentions the same thing. The patent system promotes companies that are less innovative or who defend the status quo. Furthermore, not all patents have economic value. In fact, most patents are worthless. They languish in dusty closets that cannot be used for anything. It's absurd to say patents promote innovation. Also, there are fundamental processes for technological development and innovation that cannot be patented. For example, the transmission of tacit knowledge or the know-how, the knowledge that is acquired through experience in production processes, by being there acquiring the knowledge of how that process is developed, or the communication skills of different members from different disciplines that have to be done in a tacit way. And since it is tacit, it cannot be formalized and cannot be expressed in a patent. There is another argument about why it does not promote innovation. Patents distort the pattern of allocation of research resources, precisely because there are activities that can be patented and activities that cannot be patented. So, as the activities that can be patented grant monopoly privileges, resources tend to be diverted towards these activities that can be patented. So, resources are diverted from those that cannot be patented. This was pointed out by Milton Friedman, although he incoherently defended the patent system. The patent's justification says that they encourage inventors to make inventions that, otherwise, they wouldn't make. However, most of the inventions of technological development that are patented, which are usually mechanics or technology, most of those inventions appear simultaneously and carried out by different groups of people, not a single individual. Apart from the fact that they do not promote innovation, the patent system entails other economic damages. For example, it promotes a waste of resources in legal complaints. And this has another added effect. It benefits large companies who can spend more resources on litigation and can ruin small business owners if they are disputing a patent. It also promotes the waste of resources in something called design around, which means to avoid the patent. So, a similar invention is made with different technical characteristics to avoid a patent infraction. That's a waste because it's not innovation. If the patent system did not exist, those resources that were used to design around could have been used for other innovations. Usually, patents are used in large companies for defensive purposes. They buy a lot of patents, and with that, they create a defense perimeter around technology that they are already using. And they don't do that to develop the innovations reflected in those patents. They want to prevent other companies from developing them, and prevent other competitors from competing with them. A classic example, which was the one Bastos mentioned, was Watts. Watts acquired a steam engine patent which was not based on the separate condenser he had created, but he had no intention of developing it. He wanted to prevent others from developing it, and that delayed the development of locomotives and steamboats. Watt, who has a reputation of being a technological innovator, in fact, thanks to the use of a patent, prevented technological development during the Industrial Revolution. And the last economic argument against the patent system is that it prevents the development of poor countries. Because, as Danny Roderick points out, one of the elements that historically allowed poor countries to achieve economic growth was the possibility of copying the technology invented in rich countries. If patents compliance is internationally strengthened, poor countries will have much less chance of escaping poverty. And those are basically the economic arguments against the utilitarian role of patents. And there is one left, the patent system itself, the cost of implementing it, prisons, officials, and things like that. Very short, what do you think of university plagiarism? Not everything that is not prohibited has to be good. I can be rude, insult you, call you anything. That does not fall into the criminal sphere, but it is in the sphere of lack of taste, lack of rigor, and a lack of education. In the ethical code, if we had had one, of the university, it's wrong. In fact, you should be shamed for that. Now, criminal punishment? I don't know, but you should be shamed.
Professor Bastos, ¿qué opina usted que...
To Professor Bastos, what do you think of the copyright defense made by Rothbard?
Él hablaba de un sistema de contratos.
I don't think he defended that. He talked about a system of contracts, if I remember correctly. For example, you buy a book on the condition that you could not copy it. That was a kind of easement. But if you find that book on the street, you are not obliged by that contract because you didn't sign the contract. And you can copy it if you want. It's legitimate, but it wouldn't be very functional. It's like if I sell you an umbrella, only for you to open it on Sundays. I mean, I have no way of controlling it. I could sell it with that condition and you buy it from me, but how can I make sure you are complying? He said it like a contract. The characteristic of a contract is that it does not affect third parties who did not participate in the contract. But apart from that, for example, Dickens became rich precisely because his books were pirated. Dickens and brands in general that are pirated make money from piracy. The pirate does not pirate everything. I wish my books were pirated by thousands. I wish. The thing is that nobody wants to pirate them. That's my problem. If they pirated my books, I would be famous. I would walk, for example, through Ecuador and people would greet me on the street. I would like to see my books being sold in the markets of Ecuador. I wish. I would get income in other ways. In fact, we teachers earn income if they promote us in the university career. If we get, for example, access to media, which is where we make the most money. We give paid conferences, or they promote us in our social status. That's the idea of selling books. Dickens sold so many that he earned a lot more money giving lectures, £10 a ticket. I don't know how much the ticket cost. He made a lot more money this way than the other way. My question is for Oscar Carreiro. From your words I deduce, it's not clear to me, that there is no such thing as marginal social utility, or that you assume that marginal social utility exists but we can't measure it.
Que no existe.
It doesn't exist.
No existe porque la sociedad no actúa.
It does not exist because society does not act. Society has no utility. Society does not wake up one day and says, I'm going to have a coffee and see what the utility is of this coffee I have. Can a group of individuals who want a good not demand it because they know that good can be free? The famous free rider problem. So there is a hidden social profitability, although we cannot measure it.
Primero, eso es un conjunto de, o sea, serán esos individuos, no sé si sufrirán riders o la sociedad.
First, I don't know if those individuals are free riders or the society. And also, in any case, that is not a joint utility. Each of those free riders is determining their personal utility. You can make a sum. How do you sum? What measure do you use to sum? It doesn't exist, or it exists, but we cannot know how much it is.
No, que no existe.
No, it doesn't exist. Neither externalities exist? Neither, they don't.